I need you to go to Kidshall Post Office telephone box. The instructions are inside, behind the fax board. I'm okay, but there are to be no police and no tricks, okay?
50 years ago, on the 11th of December, 1975, Britain's most wanted man walked straight into the path of two police officers on a quiet road in Nottinghamshire and ended up fighting for his life outside a fish and chip shop in the village of Rainworth. His name was Donald Nielsen, but the press knew him as the Black Panther, a former soldier turned armed robber, kidnapper, and murderer, a man responsible for a string of violent post office attacks and the abduction and death of 17-year-old Leslie Ann Whittle, whose voice you heard at the start recorded under duress in a drainage shaft deep underground. By 1975, Nielsen had evaded capture for years. He was armed, dangerous, and he was convinced he could outwit any police force in the country. He didn't expect to run into the people of Rainworth, though. After hijacking a police car, firing a shotgun inside it, and attempting to flee into the dark, Nielsen ran straight into a community that refused to let him escape. Local residents, some of them teenagers, rushed from the junction Chippy and nearby pubs and clubs to help a shell-shocked copper overpower the Panther and handcuff him to the railings. Ordinary people did something extraordinary, ending one of the most intense manhunts in British history. This Thursday, the 11th of December, Psycho Killer presenters Simon Ford and Jack Morrell will be live streaming from Rainworth, right where it happened. To mark the 50th anniversary of the Black Panther's capture, they'll retrace the route, reveal new insights, and speak directly from the locations that shaped one of the most dramatic arrests in Britain in the 1970s. Follow our socials for the link and join us as we revisit the night the Black Panther was finally caught.